Good morning. I'm thankful that you're turning into Facebook Live to hear my story. My name is Sharrel Titlebaum, and I am a daughter of two survivors of the Holocaust. I was born in a displaced persons camp in Linz, Danube, Austria, and I'm about to tell you my story from my family and how life evolved and how I got to the United States. So let's sit back, relax, enjoy your coffee, and here we go. My real name was Sarah Leah Molly Matkowski, and that's the name I was born with. And when we came to this country, my mom wanted all the letters of Sarah Leah in Sharrel, so we spell Sharrel, Sharrel. How she got that, I don't know. They dropped the Malka, which was Molly, and Matkowski went to Martin, Marton. When I was in school, one of the teachers corrected the spelling of my name, and my mom came up to school and said, nope, it's Marton. And from that on, we learned to spell my name properly. Let's go back and start over and I'll tell you about this. My mom was one of 5. My dad was one of 7. My mom lived in a little shtetl near Vilna, and it was near the forest. And they heard of the rumblings of the war, but they really weren't sure about the war and that. And one day, German soldiers came in, and they lived in Poland. And German soldiers came and they rounded up all the men of the village, men, young boys, anyone that looked husky enough or healthy enough. They rounded them all up and they marched them off into big jeeps and buses and that, and they took them away. And all the women and children were like, what just happened? They really didn't know what happened, and they weren't sure what was going to happen. They thought, oh, they'll be back in a few days. 3-4 days went by. None of the men came back. The German soldiers came back a few days later, and they marched all the other residents, the old women, the children, the young girls in a line at the edge of the forest, and they had rifles, and they said in German, which most of them spoke, or Polish, we are going to aim at you. You're going to start running when we count to 100. We're going to open fire and we're going to shoot. If we kill you, one less Jew. If we don't, we'll capture you, but you won't get away. My mom had 2 sisters and her mother. One sister was killed instantly and her mother was killed instantly, she thinks. But she and another sister who had a baby, 2-year-old little baby boy, they told them to put on as much clothing as they could, so they were kind of cumbersome and running. And they started counting the Germans, and my mom and her sister and the baby started running. You know how you hold a baby and he really doesn't touch the floor, but you got each take a hand and they run? Well, apparently the baby was shot, but nobody knew it. My mother's sister was shot in the back, and my mom was shot in the right arm and elbow. And she really didn't realize it. They ran and they ran, and they hid out under brush and that. They found some places to hide in the forest. And they traveled during the day, that night, and that day they kind of hid. And after a day or two, my mom noticed the baby wasn't crying, it wasn't hungry, it wasn't anything. And she said to her sister, let me have the baby, let me see him. And her sister said, no, you can't see the baby. And my mom said, I want to see him. And my mom said she thought he was dead, and he was. And she said to her sister, we can't carry him with us. He will slow us down, and we want to try to get back. And she said, no, I'm not leaving him. And my mom said it was one of the hardest things was to take this baby, rip it out of her sister's arms. They wrapped it in some sweaters and things that they had, and they had to make a grave. And since they had nothing to dig with, they kind of put rocks on him and put him in a little shell thing. And then my mom noticed that her sister was really very weak, and she wasn't doing well, and her fever was starting. And my mom checked her sister, and the sister was shot in the back. And she said to her, we've got to rest. And they made like poultices out of plants and things and tried to help each other. And her sister got weaker and weaker. And as she was going, my mom said to her sister, we need to rest. And her sister said in Yiddish, Rateve sich. Rateve means save, and zich is yourself. And she said, leave me behind and you go and come back for me. Maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't. And my mom said she couldn't leave her, but she had no choice. So she found like a where the bushes were thick or a big tree, and she kind of dug with her shoes because you had nothing to dig with. So she took the heels of her shoes and kind of made a little trench for her, and she gave her some leaves to suck on and some berries, and she left her in the forest and she went on. And my mom, I don't think she ever really forgave herself for her sister because she never went back for her and she knew that she was dying. My mom survived and got to a farm, and some people hid her for about a year underground with some other forest people, but then they got scared and they said, you have to go, you can't stay with us. My mom got caught and ended up near Vilna, and she was in the Vilna ghetto for about a year. And there, a German soldier took a liking to her, and she was very frightened. And she thought he took her to clean his house, and she thought he might do more to her than just clean the house. So when she used to go out in his backyard to beat the rugs and that, she found little rocks, and she would take and cut in between her fingers on the inside of her hand so it would bleed. And then she'd put the blood on her legs and her panties so that if he did touch her, he'd think she was not pure and he wouldn't leave her, he wouldn't bother her. And then what happened was he always locked the doors when he was leaving, and then he'd unlock them so he could bring her back to the ghetto. One day he got a notice or something that he was called into duty or something at the ghetto, and he left so fast that he forgot to lock the door. And she said, is this a trick? She didn't know what to do, and she waited and she waited, and he didn't come back, and the door was open. She looked around and she just took off, and she lived with the forest people or the partisans in the forest for many years through the duration of the war. When the war was ending and she was in the forest and she was walking in through Poland, I think there's a slide that's coming on for you guys for Poland. She was walking through Poland and she decided she's going to go back home to her shtetl or her little hamlet and see what's going on, if anyone survived. And on the road from Germany and Poland and Warsaw and everything, she was on the road going back to her Vilna and Lodz, and she met her father. He was very weak and very worn out, and he too survived by living in the forest. And so they went back home together. And as they were walking, another Jeep came up with different soldier uniforms, but with guns and rifles and bullets on them. And she walked a little faster, and then the Jeep pulled up a little faster. When she walked slower, the Jeep walked slower. So she said, and they were talking to her in English, and she didn't know, but she knew they were soldiers because of the uniform and the guns and the bullets, and she and her father were afraid of them. And finally, they stopped her with their hands, and they said, just wait. And they caught a Jewish soldier was with another battalion, and they brought the Jewish soldier from America in, and he spoke to them in Yiddish. And he told them that they were good people and that they would take them home. And she said, no, I don't trust you because you have all these guns on you. And he said, no, the war's over. You're okay. And we're going to take you home. So they got in the Jeep, her father and her, and they took them back to their home shtetl, and everything was decimated. It was destroyed. There was nothing left of anything of any value. There was no people, and her family was gone, her aunts, her uncles, everyone. So there was no place to stay. So they got her to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross shipped my mom and her father to Austria. Austria was divided into 3 zones. It had the British, the American, and the French. Somehow my mom ended up in the British zone. She and her father were there for a while, and then her father had dysentery and he couldn't keep food in, and he died of hunger more than anything because he just couldn't survive. He couldn't keep any nutrients in his body. So now she's all alone. My dad was one of 7, and he worked with the underground. And he was not very passive. He was very aggressive, and he fought and got captured. And he was sent to Siberia in solitary confinement because he was not easy to deal with as a prisoner. And he got to go out 1 hour a day, and they gave him some food, but that's it. But if you know your history, Germany finally turned on Russia, and the Russian army was spread so thin that they didn't have enough soldiers. So they said to their prisoners of war, if you fight for us, we will give you a gun, we'll get you organized, and you be soldiers for us. So he thought, it's not rocket science. Why should I be in solitary confinement? And in the back of his head, he always thought, I will desert. I'll get in there and I'll desert. And it took him a while, though, to get their trust. And he could shoot, but he always missed anything but food. He wouldn't shoot at any, at the Germans he shot, at any Jews or anything. He would always miss, but he got food and that. And they started to trust him and send him out on maneuvers. And he ended up with, he always says, a horse, a German Luger, which is the gun, a canteen, a warm coat, and a knife, and a horse. And he rode off one day on maneuvers, and he never came back. He deserted the Russian army. He ended up working with the underground, and he ended up in the camps, and he had a motorcycle. He worked with the Regierung. The Regierung in Yiddish is the camps people that would run the camp with the highest and the Red Cross. They were like the upper echelon and the runners of the camp, and he worked with them. And he ended up at the same camp as my mom. My dad was 10 years older than my mom, and he had a family that he tried to find for many years, and he couldn't find them. They were all killed. He had a wife and a couple kids. And he had two sisters. One left Poland before the war and went to Israel. And one, my dad snuck out with her husband through trains and that and got them to Israel. My dad was at the camp giving out bread rations, and my mom was in line. And she was very depressed and very quiet. And he took a liking to her, and he'd sneak her a little extra bread and this and that. Can we go to the next picture, please? And so they ended up in Linz, which was where the camp was, Linz, Donau, Austria. It was a big open field. The Red Cross and the highest ran it. And my mom kept saying she knew she had family in America, in Chicago and in Ohio somewhere, but she didn't know what Ohio was. And the highest helped her. And she got a hold of, she wrote a letter, the head of the highest, which was the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, helped her, and they wrote a letter to the captain of the police department in Chicago. And she said, I have an uncle, his name is Meyer Gordon, his wife is Leah, he has 3 children, and they live in Chicago, and it's my father's brother. And then she said, I have a cousin, some cousins, Philip and Eddie Cohn in Ohio, and Philip Cohn lived in Chicago too. And they got together, and the captain of the Chicago Police Department took this letter, went to every Meyer Gordon in the city of Chicago till he found the right one. And once he found the right family, they started writing and corresponding and sending her things. And she got closer with my dad, and eventually they wanted to get married. And she wrote to the cousins in Chicago and said, I want to get married. And they said, no, you can't get married. We haven't got enough money to bring you over and sponsor you. We cannot sponsor 2 people. And she was all alone, and she thought, I don't know these people in Chicago. I don't know when they're ever going to send for me. And she kept seeing my dad, and he kept giving her a little more food. And finally, they did get married. And the people in Chicago, the Gordons in Chicago, were very unhappy. And she said, I'm all alone. You guys are not alone. And I can't survive this. So she got married, and they kept writing, and they started sending chocolates and cigarettes. And my dad would take it to the black market. Can we go to the next slide? To the black market, and he would exchange it for things. I want you to look. I'm on, I don't know which side, but the lady with the little girl, that's in the camp, and that's where I lived. That was myself and my mom. And if you look at the wooden structure, it's like a longhouse. It's a big wooden barrack, no running water, no electricity, no heat. And if you know your history of Indians, which I looked up, the Indians used to have longhouses. And in the winter, the different tribes, all their families would come together, and they'd live in these longhouses and make fires, and they would stay warm. Well, that was this thing. They took blankets and twine, they hung them, the twine across the building, going across and down it, And then they put blankets, and that was your room. They kind of separated you with blankets. And to my left, so I don't know if you're seeing it the same way, there's a group picture, and I'm the little tiny girl in the front, but those were all the people that lived in that barrack with my mom and my dad and myself. Lower down is my dad, and he's on a motorcycle. He became a little more affluent with the black market. And if you carefully look at the white building behind him in the picture, it will come back later, and I want you to see it for a reason, and I'm drawing attention to that. The picture next to it, my mom is the second lady on the motorcycle. That's my dad's motorcycle. And my mom and her friend are on it. And she's dressed a little better. And we got clothes from the Red Cross. We got help from the highest. And camp life was boring, but my dad seemed to be giving out rations and working for the camp. He also went out in different places once the war was over, and he took apart gas chambers, and he saw things that he really never wanted to talk about. But my mom stayed put. My mom never really wanted to talk about the war. She told us the bits and pieces, and my dad would always talk about it. And I remember when Anne Frank, the movie, came out, my mother said, "Nope, my kids aren't going to see that. They have nothing to do with that." And my dad snuck us to the theater so we would see it, so we'd never forget. And I remember crying terribly that I saw this, but and he told me, "Clean your face up because your mom can't know you went." And so my mom found out years later that he took us, and she was very upset. But she took care of children at the camp, and everybody had jobs at the camp, and she did the best they can. She was in the camp when the war ended, and she stayed there till 51. Can we go to the next group of pictures, please? Okay. I want you to look at the lady with the purse and the fancy coat. That coat came from the Gordons, and I think the Cohens from Chicago or from the United States. She had nothing of her own, and they sent the coat and the purse. And at that time, they called purses pocketbooks. And my mom said there was nothing in that pocketbook but Kleenex. But she would walk through the camp in this beautifully warm coat and just hold her head up high and swing that purse like she owned the world. And I said, "Mom, what if someone asked you to open the purse?" She said, "I never opened the purse. There was nothing in it, no value. The only thing I had of value was the coat. It came from America." So that's how she was with that. But the picture next to her, she's in the middle of two friends, and that's the lager, and it's Linz 1947, and lager is the camp. If you look down underneath that, there's my father. My mother's in the flower dress and one of her friends. The camp was in a forest, so you could see all the trees in that, and everything was wooden. And the next picture, right under the one with her in the coat, my mom's on the far right, and they got a little more affluent. So now instead of living in a barracks, they're in the like a log cabin, and they kind of had a little more to do. And my dad also wanted to get home birds because he had things to do, and he built cages out of the forest branches of the trees, and he caught some birds and he put them in, and he was going to try to do homing pigeons and that. And one day I was playing with the birds, and one got away, and I did a little bit too hard of a squeeze on the poor little bird, and it didn't survive. So I wasn't allowed to play with the birds, but they made me sock dolls. They made me things that I could play with. I don't really remember it all. They told me about it, but I remember that we were just always together, and there wasn't a lot to do. Can we go to the next set of slides, please? Okay, I wanted you to see this because the letters, Vega Matkowski, DP. DP is Displaced Persons Camp. Wells, Liechtenstein, Barracks 18 in Austria was 1. My father was Shimon Matkowski, DP Camp 1001, Wells, Liechtenstein, Barracks 18. I wanted you to see underneath it, the open letter was written in Yiddish, and everything was written in Yiddish. They wrote back and forth to America. If you look at the top one with a little R and a red rectangle, and it says 211 on there, that came from the Gutkin family, Gordon Gutkin family from Chicago, I think. And if you see, the red triangle was censored. Anything, the letter that left the camp was censored. Anything that came into the camp had to be censored because they didn't know if they still had only refugees from the war or if they had some Nazis in there. So everything they did was absolutely censored. You could not send anything out by yourself. Everything had to go through the highest and the Red Cross. And my mom also had a little Bible that someone gave her, and she kept it under her bed. And you see, she wrote with a feather because there was no pens or anything. And you can see the middle letter was from barracks 18 and 20. So we were in 2 barracks. And my mom ended up in the infirmary for a long time because she was very, very sick. My life in the camp was, it was hopeless because nobody could leave the camp unless you were sponsored. And the sponsors had to take care of you. When they brought you over, they had to pay to bring you over, and they had to sign papers saying they will find you a place to live, a job. And if you committed a crime or something, they were guilty because they brought you. So people did not jump to sponsor people. And especially now, my mom had a little girl, which was me, and she had my dad. And the family didn't have that kind of money to bring us over. But eventually, we were brought over, and we lived in New York for a little bit, and then we came to Chicago. Next set of slides, please. Heirat Secunda. Heirat Secunda is a marriage license. The marriage license is my mom and dad's, and it tells that my dad was a mechanic, and their mother's names and father's names and grandparents' names. Everything's on this form. It's very hard to see. When I'm at the Holocaust, it's much brighter in that. But this was their wedding thing, and the seal on the bottom made it official. They got married when they were in the camps, and once they were married, then life became a little easier for both of them. And then I came along, which my mom should not have had me because she was dying of hunger too. She was very weak, and she had gallbladder trouble. And so she was in the infirmary for over a year on and off. And my dad and another nurse raised me. And I didn't know my mom till I was about 2. We go next slide. Okay, now we're ready to come to America. And you see the Hebrew Immigration Society papers, and it says immigration status, and it says 1951. The boat we came from Bremen, Germany, and the boat was the General Moore. In 1950, we were supposed to come. We had our papers done and everything. And as we got to the port in Bremen, the American ship captains and the doctors would examine you to make sure that you were healthy. They wouldn't let you into the United States. I was on my mom's passport. That was me. And what happened was I had whooping cough, and I had a very bad case. Obviously, we didn't know it. And they said, no, you can't come into the United States. And it's 1950. It took 1 full year. They sent me back they sent my whole family back from Bremen, back to Austria, back to Linz, Austria, and into the camp again. And we stayed there. When my mom undressed me to get there, and of course, everyone was very upset, and they had to take care of me and get me healthy. I had a very good locket that she had saved through the war. She had swallowed it. She had hidden it in the coat of the hem of her coat. And I changed it. I have it on, and I don't think you can see it well, but I do wear it. And I changed the locket from, I put a little diamond in, and I left the filigree, and I got a better chain for it, but it was missing. And my mother went ballistic because that was the only thing of value that she really owned. And she didn't know what to do. She had no money. They had no money. They had nothing. And here this locket is gone. And she had everyone writing. And she cried and she carried on. And there was nothing to soothe her because we couldn't find the locket. Next slide, please. In 1951 of April, here's a news bulletin. And I have it with me so I can read it to you. But in 1951, when I got off the boat, it says, to please the lady, Sarah Matkowski, which was my new name, 2 among 1,280 displaced persons to arrive on the General Moore yesterday, regains prize locket held by Bernard Cornbluth of the highest. The trinket was lost in Europe and found on another child, and they airmailed it here to Chicago, where she would live with her parents. Someone in Europe found the locket, kept it, and returned it after a year, and it was met. At my temple, I found a lady whose last name was Cornbluth, but that was her husband, and they moved to Florida. And I tried to trace the Cornbluth man. He was older in this picture. That's me with the locket. And I couldn't find him. I tried very hard. And she even called some relatives and that, but there was no success. We didn't find him at all. I felt very, very bad because I tried so hard to see if I could find someone to thank them. I really believe that people are good because this person kept my locket for a year. The police department went all over the city of Chicago with my letter and went to find everyone. And so basically, I believe that people are good and that you just have to pass it forward. And that's how I feel about things. My parents and I did get here in 1951 of April. It was right around Passover. And I remember my mother didn't know, I think it was like they took her to a grocery store and the food was just so plentiful and the produce, she didn't know what to do. She absolutely had no idea that people bought food like this and that. And I think it was the first Passover and she really didn't know what to buy and she didn't know how to cook American, but we all had a great Passover. It was so thankful. And she invited, when she came to America on the boat, we met other refugees. And every Sunday, because we had no aunts, no uncles, no cousins, we would stay with the refugees. And every Sunday, someone else took it at their house and we all had dinner. But for Passover, she found the Gordons and the Gutkins came and she took I think he was my cousin's grandfather from Uncle Ralph from Evoluth, Minnesota, and his wife, Tante Bela. Tante's aunt, I don't know her real English name, but we called her Bela, Tante Bela. And because my mom kept kosher, we were Orthodox at that time, and she kept a very kosher home, and my relatives did too. And I remember her saying how wonderful it was to be able to go to a store and buy things and have food because everything else was rationed. When I was teaching and I was retiring, can we go to the next slide? My daughter, Jessica, worked for the Border Trade and she traveled a lot. And I said to her, let's do a mother-daughter trip. And I thought, well, we'll either kill each other or we'll survive. And so we went on this trip and she said, where do you want to go, Mom? Do you want to go to, where'd she ask me? India. I said, absolutely not. Thailand, no. So she said, where do you want to go? I said, my parents have passed away. Let's do some research and let's see if we can find where I was born, the place I was born, and let's see if we can go there. And she looked at me like, are you serious? And I said, yes, I've never been allowed to go back to Europe since the war, and I'd like to try. So we went, and it was a very hard trip. I was afraid. But when she was in India, she made friends with a girl whose mother was German and her father was from Sri Lanka. And she lived in Hamburg. And we wrote her and she said, you can stay at my place. You can leave luggage there and then take trains everywhere. And we still talk to her. Her name is Nadine Najahara. And we went there and she made me feel wonderful. And she gave us her bedroom. And we traveled through Europe. We went to Germany. And I don't know how, but we were immersed. And all of a sudden, I was speaking German again on the streets. And I could talk to them and I could haggle and shop. My daughter was just amazed by that. And then we were going to Austria. And I said to her, I'm a little nervous, but we'll go. And that morning we woke up and it was raining. And I went to wash up and there was no water running at the hotel. The hotel next door to us was going under construction and they turned off the water. And I said, Jessica, there's no water. We can't go. I can't wash up. And she looked at me like, are you nuts? And she went to turn on the water. I said, Sam, that's stupid. The water's not running. And she said, Mom, there's no water. I said, okay. So we went and called the desk and they said, the restaurant next door will let us wash up and use the bathroom and everything. So we got dressed, we went. It was a very cold, rainy day. And I had a map and I couldn't, the Austrian dialect was so different. I could understand, but I really couldn't speak that German. It was too hard for me, but I got across what I wanted. And we got into one car and we showed the lady where we wanted to go. And she said, no, out of the car. I won't take you. And we kept saying, round trip, no. A taxi pulled up and it was a young man. He was from France. So he spoke French, a little bit of German, absolutely no English. My daughter spoke Thai and Italian, which did me no good. And I spoke Yiddish and German. So between the German and the English and hand movements and that, we showed him on a map where he wanted to go. And he said to me, noch Nazis. So he said, noch means still, more Nazis. So I said, yes. And he said, okay. So we're driving and my daughter said, before we left, the camp was all wood, so it had burnt down. And I was just disheartened when she told me that, but I didn't think it would stand. And we were driving and she found out there was going to be a statue or a plaque made of the camp. And so dedicated to the camp. And we had no idea what it looked like or where it was on this big field. And we drove and all of a sudden she saw it and she started screaming, there it is, there it is, there it is. And he did this U-turn that almost killed all of us. But we got out and we took pictures. And that's the 2 pictures. That's my daughter and myself. It was a very cold, wintry day. And we got to the monument, and it said that this was done to honor the Jews that were there as a camp and the lager, and it's for a dedication. And we took pictures. And that white building that I showed you in the earlier things is behind us in the second picture, the lower one on the lower right. And that was that same white building. They had cleaned it up and we looked at the building and I just shook. And the best part of this story is that it was raining and I had a little plastic bag and I bent down because I didn't know where I was born, but this was dirt. Like I always say to the kids when I speak, how many of you know what hospital you were born at? Raise your hand. Well, I don't know. So I went down, I took out this plastic bag and I dug some dirt. I just pulled dirt with grass on it and I stuck it in this little plastic Ziploc bag. I zipped it up and I put it in my pocket. And my daughter said, why are you taking that? And I said, it's dirt from where I was born. And at my school where I taught, they used to have little vials of glasses, little vials, and you'd put the sand or dirt or whatever from the different countries, and it would say that. And my principal said, if you get some, I'll put it up there in the thing too. So I was very excited because I was going to put it in my little vial and it would be at my school and I would see it every day. And I thought, I'm done. I know where I am. And as we were leaving, I have to tell you, we were in customs and I got off the plane and they said, do you have anything to declare? And I pulled out my little bag of dirt. Now, mind you, this is several days later. The little bag of dirt was very dry, very dirty looking, and it looked like contraband. And the guy goes, what is that? Throw it out. And I said, oh, no. You can't throw this out. Are you kidding me? And he said, lady, throw it out. Now, I want you to know I'm going through customs and there's a whole big line behind me. And my daughter, because she's an American, went to a different line. And you know, your children think like, oh, you're so embarrassing, crawl under a rock and I won't know this woman. And I'm getting louder and he's getting louder and I'm not throwing this out. And then they call a supervisor. And then my daughter saw how upset I was and she got through and she came over to me and she said, that's dirt from where she was born. She was born in the camps. Let her have it. And they called us over and they took us in another room with the supervisor. And then some other people behind me said to the man, just let her through. I mean, we have to go. And he wouldn't. So they put me in this room with her and the supervisor. And I said to the supervisor, you know, this means something to me. I understand I can't bring it into the country, but I should have put it in my suitcase and never told you about it. Here I was honest. And I'm being punished for being honest. And he was just rude. He threw it in the garbage can and I just took it out of the garbage can. And he really was very rude. And I said to the supervisor, I will give this up. I understand that if I ever come back, I'd hand it in my suitcase or hide it somewhere. But I didn't like the way I was treated. You took away my dignity. He could have waited till I left and he stamped my passport. And once I went through, he could have thrown it out. But to throw it out in front of me just set me off. And I was just so enraged. and she apologized for that. And I think he ended up going for how to treat people, because other people I heard were complaining about him. And I didn't want him fired. I didn't want anyone to lose their job, but I wanted an apology because I felt that you took away my dignity. You treated me like I was a piece of dirt too. And I didn't mean anything by it. I was being honest. I told you what it was, and it didn't look that great, but you should have been nicer to me. And that was, and I was really tenacious about this, and I really complained, and I wrote letters, and I got what I wanted. So I didn't get to keep the dirt. So if I ever go back, I know never to put it out in my pocket and declare it. I would hide it in my luggage. But I did feel that I had accomplished something. I don't think there's, I don't know if there's any more pictures at this point. No, so can we go back to the last one? I want to tell you one thing though. I had a hard life, and when I came here, we were poor. My mom had boarders to live with us. I had, my mom was a cleaning lady. She couldn't speak English well. I think if we have a little time, I'll tell you a very funny story, and then I'll end and we can have some question time. My mom learned to speak English and write and read phonetically. She decoded. And one day, my brother came home from school. He was about 8th grade. I was already in high school. And he said to my mom, every Friday night, she made the Jewish Sabbath dinner. And he said, Mom, I'm tired. I'm tired of your Jewish food. I want a burger. And she said, what's a burger? And he said, I want a burger. So he explained it to her, and she said, oh, a hamburger like everyone else. He said, Mom, we call it burgers. And she said, okay. He said, you can make everything else, but my main course has to be a burger. And my mom said, she talked it over with my dad, and I think the store was the A&P, and she went and she bought non-kosher meat, a fry pan, a spatula, a mixing bowl, stuff that wasn't kosher because the meat wasn't kosher. And it came Friday, and she was making this burger, and the house stunk. It was absolutely the worst smelling house you had ever imagined. And my mother kept saying, I don't know what's wrong with this meat. And she was swearing at it in every language she knew. She spoke Polish, Russian, Yiddish, and German, and a little of Latvia. And she kept saying, it's not working. And she made patties, and she sauteed onions and mushrooms, and she bought the buns, and then she made some patties and put them in the oven. And it was an odd color meat, and it was absolutely awful. And my dad came home, and he said, Faye, the house smells awful. And she said, blame your son, he wants American food. And so my dad said, well, what did you buy? And they were talking. And as she was talking, she said to my dad, something is very wrong with the Americans, and anything that went wrong was the Americans' fault, not hers. So she said, these Americans are very stupid. And he said, why? He said, they didn't put the meat in the cooler. So my dad said, what did you buy? Where's the container? And she said, oh, it's on the porch in the garbage can. And he went out there, and he looked at the meat, the ones in the pan and ones in the fry pan. And he said to everyone, don't touch this. And we went out into the garbage can. And remember, I told you she spoke phonetically, and she had this box, and it said burger on it, which it did. But it was Gaines burgers. It was dog food. And we were just rolling in laughter. And she got very upset because she said, well, look, we have cereal with a tiger on it, and we don't eat tigers in our cereal. So she just thought it was a brand and not dog food. And she made this Gaines burgers for us for dinner. And we just roared. My brother won like $500 when he wrote the story up in his paper or something for school. But she never, and we always teased her about burgers, and she never, ever let us have hamburgers again. She only made them from her meat, and we couldn't buy out. So again, my dad used to sneak us off. And the biggest thing was to go to McDonald's and get a burger for school, because we weren't allowed to get that at home. And she never lived that one down. Even when my brother was older, my brother's 66 now, my parents are gone. But even when he was younger and he was in his 30s, he'd say, Mom, want to go out for a burger? And she'd say, get out of my house, get out of my sight, because it was such a bad memory. But we laughed very hard on that. There were some good times. I grew up poor, but I grew up loved. I didn't have a big family. The Europeans that I came over with were my family. But I have to tell you this, because of my mom and dad surviving, life came to be for me. My family, my children are the answer to the injustice and the hatred that was perpetrated on us. My ancestors are a generation that were starved, tortured, separated. Some were united after the liberation. Some went to America. Some must have gone to Israel. But they came to America and they tried to escape these unspeakable kind of evil that they had fought for and my family has a generation of ghosts. Nobody knows family history. When my daughter got married and got pregnant, we were a little worried because I have no family history on either side, my father or my mother's. Everybody was killed, and I was very worried, but thank God everybody's healthy, everybody lives well. And if it wasn't for my parents and their will to survive, I wouldn't be here today. But we feel like I'm here today and Hitler isn't. So I made it. My family made it. And to Hitler's demise, we made it and we're thriving. I have children, I have grandchildren. And I always wanted a generational picture because I never had one. And when my daughter had kids and my other daughter is single, we had a picture. It was a mom, daughters, and grandchildren. And so now I have a generational picture, and I'm so excited when I see my kids. And I think to myself, thank God we've made it. We have survived and we're thriving. I taught them to get on their own and to get degrees and to live well. And they're good people, they're productive, and everything is going well. I became a widow 9 years ago, but that's one part of my life that I understand, but I'm never unhappy. I try my hardest to be happy. I'm 3 weeks out of hip replacement, so I wiggle a little bit because it hurts to sit some days. But I have to tell you that I had a good life. I was poor, but I didn't know any better. And one of my biggest things that when I was married and had children is I didn't use hand-me-downs. I always said to my husband, I can't buy hand-me-downs because my mom was a cleaning lady for other people, and she would bring home clothes and take a tuck here and a tuck there, and I had to wear those. And what comes to mind is I remember there was a book, I don't know if any of you know it, it's called 100 Dresses, and my mom read it to me. It was about a little refugee girl who lived with her father and her brother. The mother had passed away and they were very poor, and she would wear the same dress every day and wash it out, or there were two dresses. And she would tell everyone at school she had 100 dresses in her closet. And, children made fun of her and picked on her. And one day she didn't come to school. And the next day she didn't come to school. And they thought, oh, she's washing her dresses. And then the teacher got concerned the third, fourth day. So they decided to go to her apartment. And the apartment was empty. They had moved away. And when they opened the closet, though, there were drawings of 100 different dresses. And so I remember my mom used to draw dresses with me so that I would think that one day I'm going to have all these clothes too. And I really was not a great share of clothes except with my sister-in-law and her sister. We shared some clothes that were cute, but I usually didn't want them to have hand-me-downs, which was my own spiel, my own thing. But on the whole, I have to say I'm happy. I have a good life. I'm productive. And I get to talk to you and tell you my history. So I'm very happy. I also have to tell my people that I was in this book, Stories of Survival, Object, Image, and Memory. And I think it was it's a traveling exhibit. And I have to tell you one thing that I wrote in here that I want to leave you with. And it says, the biggest word in my vocabulary is hope. After the war, my parents and I represented hope. And hope means the bloodline would live on. Hope, there was a return to humanity after the war. Hope, there's a sense of again belonging to a family. Hope, they had a will to live and make a life together. And hope, there's a future. And those were the words and sentences I live by because there is hope. and you cannot give up hope. This exhibit is at, right now, I don't know my Ohio contingency if you're on, it's at the Maltz Museum, either in Shaker Heights or University Heights, but I know it's in Ohio, and it's going to be leaving because of COVID soon, and they're getting the RBG exhibit, and this exhibit will probably go to Houston. I was supposed to go to Ohio and meet family there and represent this, but I didn't, and because of COVID, and I don't think I'll get to Texas either. But there's hope that I might get there, so we hope. And I'd like to go to Georgia to the Race Museum. That concludes my story. I will be taking questions. Anything you need to know, I will try to answer as best I can. Thank you for listening. And I want to tell you that, Lauren, I need my phone. I need to tell you once I close. Let's do the questions and then I'll close. How's that? Okay. Any questions?
We do have a couple questions.
Okay. Lauren.
First, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
This is wonderful. I loved hearing the burger story. That was great.
I know, people love the burger story.
The first question I've got is, did your father write down or record any of his war experiences?
My dad was, I think it was Bill Curtis. He came from, he had a friend who came from Rockford to interview my parents. My mother would not talk. She didn't want any part of it, but my dad did talk and he was recorded. My mom came in on a little bit of it, but not much. But my dad was recorded, and I think Bill Curtis came and talked to him. So some of it is, I had a tape of it, but they were supposed to send it again. And I don't know what happened. We had a flood in my old house, and I think that was one of the things that was destroyed.
That's unfortunate. You mentioned you guys were in New York first. How long were you in New York?
New York, we went to Ellis Island, and there my name was changed from Sarah Leah Molly Matkowski to Sharrel Martin. My dad was Simon Matkowski. He went to C.Y. Martin, and my mom was Fega Matkowski, Fega Gutkin Matkowski, and she went to Fay, F-A-Y, Martin. So we were in New York. Relatives kept us till they found the people in Chicago, and everybody contacted, and I guess they had kind of a meeting like where would we thrive the best and what we would do. So I was in New York maybe a few months. Then we came to Chicago, and then I went back to New York to visit family. And you know, the people that I visited in New York and I stayed with was a cousin of my mom's. I didn't really have real cousins. And in Hebrew, the word for ice cream is glida, I think. And we use that word. And my cousin was in like 21. He would bring me a little tiny Dixie cup of ice cream every day when he came home from work, or every other day. And one day he brought me, and I would wait for it. I mean, I just thought it was the greatest thing because we didn't have it. And one day he brought it home, and inside it, I opened up the lid, you know, picked it up, and there was a green turtle, and I dropped it. I was hysterical. He brought me a pet turtle, and I took that turtle home once I got used to it on the train. And they found, the Chicago people said they could get us a house and a place to live better. New York was a little higher. And so we kept going back to New York. And the funny thing is, this one cousin died, and somebody called me to tell me she lives now in Laguna Beach, California. And she had children, but I didn't know them. And one of the cousins called me and said, "You're on my mother's phone book, and we don't know who you are exactly, but we think we know." And we started talking, and now I found blood relatives. And I go on Facebook just to see them, and they gave me their phone number, and she has brothers. I haven't met the brothers, but her name is Janet Gutkin, and she's in Florida. And I always look for her, and she writes to me, and we were supposed to meet this summer because I have never met her, but with COVID, we're done. Any more questions?
Yeah. When did your parents first start sharing their stories with you?
I think it was when we were old enough to understand. My mother was always afraid of the neighbors listening or someone talking against the government. I don't know why, but she didn't like Eisenhower. So when she'd say something about Eisenhower, I don't know what happened, but she wouldn't buy stamps with him on it or anything. And one day we said, why are you like this? And why are we always so quiet in the house? And why can't we talk about the government? And then she told us her story. And as she got older, she was more open. But, you know, a lot of the Holocaust survivors don't like to bring this up, and they don't like to talk about what happened to them. It's like compartmentalized in their heads, in the back of their brain, but they don't. My dad felt that never again, and he needed to talk, so he talked.
Did your parents ever go to Israel?
Yes. My mother wrote a letter to the Yad Vashem in Israel. And, you know, the sister that lost the baby and lost her own life, she had a husband. And it turned out they found him. He had remarried and he was in Israel. And he was a good 8 years older than her, I think. And she went to meet him, and my dad went with her. And we stayed with family with, I don't know if you know, the original Kaufmans from Kaufman Bagel Bakery were also Holocaust survivors. So they took us in. And my dad said my mom was like crazed till she was afraid he'd blame her for the baby's death, for his wife's death. And she was so thrilled to see him because he was a brother-in-law, and he had remarried, and he said he couldn't find anyone, and he had family, and he had grandchildren and children and grandchildren, and they corresponded for quite a while together. And then I don't know what happened, if he died or not, but we lost contact with them.
Okay. A couple more questions. When did you start, when did you get involved with the museum? When did you start sharing your family's story?
You know, it's a funny story. One day it was Yom Kippur, and I was supposed to speak at my temple's service, and I was following somebody who was talking all about prayers and how the prayers of the holiday mean to him. And I looked at my thing, and I was going to tell my life story, and I was starting out with, my name is, how many know me by this name, how many know me by my jobs at the temple. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm completely off. So 5 minutes before I'm supposed to go on, I come off the stage and I take a pencil and paper, and a woman named Carol Barrington said to me, where are you going? You are on in 3 minutes. I said, I have to rewrite my story. She said to me, are you kidding me? I said, I'll go to the bathroom and I'll think of something. And she said, no. So I got back up on stage, and someone next to me said, what is wrong with you? And I said, I don't have anything about prayers. And she said, just go with what you have. And of course, I'm long-winded. So instead of 3 minutes, I spoke for 7. My family, my brother and sister-in-law and my nieces and my kids were in the audience. And they were the only ones when I said, who knows my real name? And they raised their hands. And I took off. And then someone came up to, I think it was Ernie Hyman. He's the speaker at the Holocaust Museum. He came up to me and said, I didn't know your story. Why don't you speak at the Holocaust Museum? I said, I work, I have kids, I don't have time. And he said, I'm getting you an interview with Amanda. I went to Amanda's, and I was supposed to hear someone. She had 200 and some odd kids in the basement, and the speaker didn't show up. I had just come from the health club, and I said, I could do this. And she said, no, you can't. I go, yes, I can. I know my story. So she handed me a mic, and I took off. And from then on, I've been speaking. I love it.
That's a great way to start doing it.
I apologize today because I'm wiggly because of the hip surgery, but there I was not prepared to speak. But you know your own story, and you know what it is, and I loved it. I ate it up.
When did you tell your children about your story?
When they were, I think, in Chicago, in the suburbs too. I think you have to study the Holocaust, I think, in 7th grade, and then again in high school. When they were in 7th, I wasn't that sure that they could handle it, and my mom was still alive. So she talked to them a little bit, and then I told them the story, and I showed them the pictures that my mom had. And then when they did the stories of survival, object image, there was a big big, like, I can't think of the word now suddenly. I know it in Yiddish, but I can't say it in English. It was a big, like, open house, and they had like food, and it was like just to bring people in. And I brought a lot of people in, and my kids came and saw that too. And I think it kind of So they saw everybody's things, and they saw and they met other people. And I think it opened them up to a lot. And they know my story. They've come to hear me speak at the Holocaust Museum.
Brilliant. Another question that just popped up is, are you still kosher or are you observant?
I am not kosher anymore. After I was kosher at the beginning of my marriage, and then I stopped. I was Orthodox, then I went to traditional, and now I love it. I'm Reformed. I have a great rabbi in Rebbitzin. I love being it. My children are Chabad, some of them, my older ones. So we've gone the gamut of religion, but I have to say, religion is religion. I don't keep kosher, but I do my Friday night candles. I do observe holidays. I just am not as strict.
Okay. One last question. What is the kind of message or takeaway that you want people to have from hearing your?
I want people to know that you can't judge someone or stereotype. I think you have to judge each person as you deal with them, and that all people are really basically good. There are some bad apples, but it's how you deal with them, and that you have to see and talk to them and interact. I tell my kids when I talk, even if this child had the ugliest shirt on or something, I would always say, if they look kind of sad, I say, oh, I love your shirt, or you have such nice hair today, or just give them a compliment, because you don't know what they're dealing with at home. Just like I had the dresses and the 100 dresses, I was poor. I didn't have a lot of clothing. I didn't have a lot of things. And I had a second grade teacher who just kind of took me under her wing. And when my mother went to get citizenship, my teacher threw a party for her in the afternoon, and we had cake and ice cream. And she didn't have to do that, but she made my mom more comfortable coming to school, because my mom would never come to school because she couldn't speak English. But she called my mom and said, I hear you're taking citizenship, come. And it was just one-on-one. I think that you have to be open to the world. You have to see what they do with you, how you react. I think people are basically good. I think you have some bad apples, but you don't know what's caused them. So take each person as you come into them. And this bullying, I'm totally against bullying. I think that you need to just take a step back and think, what is this person going through? Is there something that I could do to make their life a little better? Or how do they impact my life? And that's how I try to live my life. I don't think that there's anyone that's awful out there that would hurt intentionally. I think some people have to learn to be good and learn how to be kind, because you don't know what they've gone through. If you take anything away, know that everybody has their own story, and you have to be respectful and acknowledge it.
Thank you so much. I am going to let you close out.
Hold on, Lauren, I need my phone. I'm so sorry, because she took it away and my closing's there. But I just have to thank everyone for coming and for listening. I don't know how many people we have on, but I want you to know that I really appreciate you giving up your time in that. And I want you to know that next week, December 16th at 10 o'clock, I want you to hear the Holocaust survivor, Eric Blaustein, share his story of survival. Please keep an eye on the Illinois Holocaust Facebook page and the social media accounts. They post everything. I think this will be streaming after. Sierra, help me out. Will they be able, if those people that didn't see this now can see it later?
Absolutely. It's recorded.
Okay. I have to thank each and every one of you. Please support this museum and what it does. I think that it's a great museum. I think it does a lot, and its programs are phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being part of this morning. And I hope that I've given you some insight to my life and to the Holocaust. Thank you.